Good evening. Welcome to the Offered Education meeting. My name is Ted Cayley, and I'm introducing myself tonight, and I actually have a slide about me, so we'll go away from the formal introductions and just get started with making this presentation tonight. So I'll get you out of here as soon as we can. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is the fact that I have a son who has been dealing with ME/CFS for the last 17 years. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey and his journey, and a little bit about my background and how I got to where I ended up being a caregiver, and go from there. So let's talk about me, okay? First of all, I'm a first-generation Greek American, 100% Greek descent. And I'd like to start out telling you one of the formative events in my life that kind of, my kids are sick of hearing this story, but it's a true story. When I was about 11 years old, I was living in the inner city in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was 11 years old, and I went to take a bus, which was about a block and a half from our fourplex. And the bus was stopped, and I was about a half block away, so I started running to the bus. And just as I got there, he shut the door, and the light turned green, and he looked over at me, and I'm pleading, like, let me in, and he just took off. So my response to that was, gee, what options do I have? And so I looked down and I saw that it was a short street to the next street, and I thought, well, maybe I can catch him. Because the light was green, I could run across the street. So I'm running down the street. He stops, picks up some people. The light was red. 10 feet before I got to the door, the light turned green. I got to the door, looked at him again, he looked at me and took off. This happened 2 more times, okay? By now I'm exhausted, and I'm just running like crazy because it would become like a mission, right? I get to the 5th light. I got there maybe 3 seconds earlier, and I didn't even stop at the door. The door was closed. He saw me coming. He'd been looking through the rearview mirror the whole time this was going on. And so what I did is I just was very foolish, but I jumped out in the street and went like this to the front of the bus at 11 years old. And he looked at me like, really? And I just stood there. You know, Tiananmen Square kind of thing, long before Tiananmen Square. So he sheepishly opened the door. I got on the bus. I didn't realize that the whole bus had been watching this whole thing. And everybody on the bus started applauding and clapping. So that was a very empowering experience for me. At the age of 11, I had the dangerous notion that, hey, I can stop a bus. And that was something that I've kept with me my whole life. So that's my bus story. I was the first, actually the only college graduate in my family, my immediate family. And I was very fortunate to be able to get a good education in St. Louis. I went to Washington University. I got a degree in electrical engineering, and I minored in English literature, Shakespeare to be specific. And that caused all kinds of problems because I'd go to my Shakespeare classes with my slide rule in my hand. This was back in the 60s. And they would all laugh at me. And then I'd go to my engineering class with my book Shakespeare in my hand, and they'd all laugh at me, you know, so I was kind of ridiculed on both ends. I also went back to school, night school, to get a degree in psychology. I was about 9 hours away from that when we had our 3rd child, I think, or whatever it was. So I started out as an electrical engineer in the aerospace field, spent about 5.5 years in engineering, and because of this mix of engineer and English lit, I knew I wasn't going to be an engineer my whole life. I didn't want to sit in front of an oscilloscope, and I really wasn't a very good engineer, to be honest with you. So I went into sales engineering and marketing the rest of my career. And I ended up in some management positions. The last one was as a national sales manager for a company down in Phoenix that did about $85 million in sales. And boy, that was great except for one thing. I didn't like it at all. I didn't like managing, especially the first time I had to actually let somebody go. So I decided to change completely, and I ended up becoming an independent businessman up here in Utah. And I started a business up here, and that's what I was doing for the last 30 years. Now I'm retired. So the important part of my life has started. And so what I've been doing, one of the things that I did was I was asked by Dr. Bateman to help put together this little organization called Offer. Back in 2001, actually, we started, and it was formed in 2002. And she asked me to be the founding chairman of the board. And so I reluctantly said I would do that. I had a good friend, not a good friend, but a good acquaintance, who I invited because his wife had fibromyalgia. And they came to one of those first meetings, and in fact, the first meeting. He was a very high-powered lawyer here in Salt Lake City. And so we left that meeting, and we got together for lunch or something, and he told me, he said, "Ted, good luck with that, but that organization will be gone in less than a year." So I like to rub that into him, when I see him. So that's what I've been doing for the last 40-some years. I'm going to list some of the heroes in my life. One of them is my father. I'll talk about that. Another one is my sister. Had a big impact on me. My wife, who's sitting here tonight. Thank you for being here. And my children. I've got 3 children, and they're all just amazing people. I could do a presentation on all 3 of them. Tonight I'm going to focus on just one of them. So my father. My father grew up in Greece, a little town called Tripoli. And Greece was in very bad shape around the turn of the century, last in the 20th century. And devastated by World War I and poverty-stricken, no jobs. He made it to the 6th grade before he had to go out and get a job. And it was very hard to find work. He was in the military for a while. I think that was probably partly just to be able to make it, So it was pretty tough. So he wasn't alone, but he ended up being a stowaway on a Belgian freighter when he was 24 years old. And he made his way from Belgium to the United States. He jumped ship in New York Harbor. And he had a lot of resources. He had no money, and he didn't speak English. Somehow he managed to make it in the U.S. and became a respectable businessman. He started a restaurant, which was pretty common for Greeks, and still is. And he ended up really being quite successful considering where he started. The fact that he got it done somehow just amazes me to this day. Think about how rough we think things are for us. Then you think about that guy on that freighter. So he was undocumented. He was an undocumented alien for 20 years. So I'm a little bit, you kind of know where I stand on the undocumented alien issue. Okay, because if things were the way they were today, I might not be here. Yeah. I might be speaking Greek, which wouldn't be so bad, but anyway. So then what happened was in World War II, at the end of World War II, the president asked all undocumented aliens to come forward. And he did. And so they proceeded to begin deportation proceedings. And but his family and friends, and he had a business, and they came, and the story is I was a little baby in his arms. And so they allowed him to stay, and he got his naturalization at that time. And then 5 years later, he became a U.S. citizen. So he had a pretty rough go. Then he finds out 5 years later that my sister, who was only 15 years old, that she was going to not survive another year. And they brought the whole family in. They said, you know, she's got this illness and she's not going to be here a year from now. So that was a big blow to him. So from that point on, he was a caregiver. And he was a great caregiver. I can remember him, you know, rubbing her back where she had sores and things. And just the love and affection that he showed had a big impact on me. What I learned from that, I learned what unconditional love looks like. Okay. The next one's my sister. She became ill at the age of 15 with what they now call Crohn's disease. I don't know if you remember. There's nobody here old enough to remember, probably, but President Eisenhower had Crohn's disease, had ileitis. That's what Crohn's disease is. That's what they called it back then. And then about a year later, we were told that she wasn't going to live. And so you can imagine the effect that that had on her. She was this little tiny 5'2", you know, really thin, petite, little, beautiful little woman. And but she was tougher than nails. Okay, she was the strongest person I've ever met. When she gripped my hand, even though she didn't look like she had muscles at all, it was like unbelievable. 5 years later, she was still alive. Okay, but my father passed away very suddenly from lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker. He was a very robust guy up until 6 weeks before he died. So that had to be really hard on her because he was really close with her. I want to tell you about the trip to Chicago to tell you about this girl. 1963, I was 17, 18 years old, and her doctor said that things were hopeless. And she said, you know, is there anybody anywhere that might be able to help me? And he said, well, there's this guy in Chicago, Dr. Ivy. He's at the University of Chicago. And in fact, he's a guy that's pretty famous if you were a medical field, because he was involved with Cryobiosm, and they thought that was a cure for cancer. But it's a long story. But anyway, so she says to me, Ted, you're going to take me to Chicago. I was like 18 years old, and we had the hottest Chevy. My dad, when he bought a car, he bought it before he passed away. He didn't know anything about cars, so he just went to the floor, you know, the showroom floor with me, and he pointed at that one and said, that looks good. You know. Well, it had this huge engine, you know, and it was just the hottest car. You had no idea how hot that car was, but I did. So my wife, my sister and my mother and myself, we get in the car and we drive up to Chicago. We go to see Dr. Ivy, and he's in this laboratory that looks right out of like Frankenstein, okay? And he's got the white coat, the whole 9 yards, and he's you know, he's a little short guy. And he starts talking to my sister. He had gotten all of her records before she got there. And so he said, well, let's see what we can do about this. He was German. And so he's got this big shelf behind him. There's this long laboratory table and a big shelf behind him. And there's these big bottles of stuff, big bottles. Then he goes up and he's looking. He grabs this big bottle and puts it down on the counter. And it says, in big bold print, for animal use only, you know. And he says, let's try this. It turned out to be prednisone, but it was before prednisone was approved for anybody. And so she started taking it, and it really helped. So she was pretty tough. So then, you know, she said, you know, I've got this friend, you know, and I want to get married. And of course, my mom and I said, get married? You know, you're way too sick to get married. You can't get married. she got married, okay? My wife was in the wedding, actually, before. I don't think we were married yet. Yeah. So then she said, I want to get a job. And we said, what? You can't get a job? There's no way you get a job. So she became a hairdresser, okay? She had a job. And then finally she said she wanted to have a child. She didn't have the equipment to have a child. You know, she had numerous surgeries, and it was not feasible for her to have a child of her own, but she said, I want to have a child. So we tried to talk her out of that. She adopted a child, okay? And guess what I learned from that? You don't know what you can't do just because you haven't done it yet, okay? She ended up living to the age of 37 and was a great inspiration to the rest of my life in terms of what you can and cannot do, what's possible. Well, there's my son. Let's talk about him for a little bit, okay? First of all, at about the age of 5, we learned pretty quickly that he was very capable of drawing. He liked to draw. And he was good at it. And then when he got a little bit older, he started painting. He was good at it. We have pictures in our home, you know, paintings in our home when he was 12, 13, 15. Came in second at the Utah Fair, State Fair, the painting we have in our bathroom, actually. So he's always had a great talent and a great creative ability to produce wonderful things. And that was something that was more of a hobby, I think, for him. But he was really good at it. It was a wonderful gift. He still has that gift today. But anyway, so there's an example of one of his paintings. He's also a scholar, okay? He's the most well-educated member of the family. He got his master's at the University of Oregon, and he was working on his PhD at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And his mission in life, his goal was very clear for a long time. He wanted to become a professor, and he wanted to be an academic. That was his goal. In the middle of his PhD, after he finished all of his coursework, and all he had left was his thesis, he got food poisoning, he believes. It was chicken, if I remember correctly. And it was pretty severe. You know, a lot of flu-like symptoms. And then that didn't go away. And he developed a permanent condition, which was later defined as CFS, ME/CFS. And so he had to start a new life. So he changed his plans. And one of the things he did was he moved to, he started on a journey. And the journey was about finding answers. To give you an example of what he was facing, you know, one of the people that we went to see together actually here in Salt Lake was a neurologist. The neurologist did all of the neurological work that they do, and because of the nature of this illness, he didn't see anything way out of line. We could have shown him some places to look today that he wasn't looking at back then, okay? But at that time, he didn't see any out of line, so he brought John and I back in, and he said, you know, I think it's just in your head. You just need to get out there and get going. And the thing that's really perverse about that is that he was probably right on the first count, you know. We're now learning that it's very likely an illness that's degenerative in the brain. But that wasn't what he was thinking. He was thinking, you know, just go out there and get going. You're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. I don't know how many of you patients have faced that, but I can tell you he's faced it numerous times. And his attitude toward that is, let's find somebody who can help me to understand this. So he began a journey of discovery to try to figure out what was going on with him and how he could get some help. And my wife and I helped him in every way we could in that endeavor, but he did a lot of the heavy lifting and a lot of the hard work. When he was still in North Carolina, he moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, so that he could be under the, have a guy named Dr. Lapp, Charles Lapp, who is very much a Dr. Bateman kind of person. He devotes most of his efforts to ME/CFS. He's very well renowned in the field. And he was doing a big Ampligen study. I don't know if you're familiar with Ampligen, but it's an immunomodulator that is manufactured by Hemispherics Biopharma. It's been on the market. It's been around for a long time. It's never been approved by the FDA yet. But he did a lengthy study with Ampligen, which is not easy. It's infusions. He did everything that we could possibly think that might be of help in order to find some improvement. And it's been very resistant. Some things have actually backfired and actually caused complications. Other things seem to have no positive effect. Other things have been somewhat helpful. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag. I'll tell you, everybody who's listening to this or sees this, you're going to have people come to you and say, "Look, I've got a cure for this thing. Take this oil and put it on your back, and it'll be gone in 6 months. Or take this supplement, or go to this clinic." So there's a lot out there. Anybody who says they have a 95% cure rate, be a little suspicious of, okay? Because, and I see a lot. You'd be amazed how many people claim that. If half of them are right, we wouldn't have any illness. It'd all be gone by now. Just do the math. His effort to pursue a way for help, to me, was inspiring. He's always had a positive attitude about being open. He's gotten cautious over the years because, we've tried some things maybe that we maybe shouldn't have tried. One in particular was a major study, a very reputable school, college. And we didn't wait for the results of the study because we were so anxious to get some relief for our son. And he was willing to go along with it. And it caused like 4 months of very tough times. So you have to be careful. We all want our family and friends to get better. But there has to be a lot of discernment. We have to be idealistic, not optimistic. There's a difference. My son taught me that. It's okay to be idealistic, but sometimes in our optimism and enthusiasm, we go down a path that's maybe not helpful. Okay? So I guess the question that I've asked myself many times, how does my son cope so well with this new, unexpected life that he's living? I mean, if you saw the way he lives his life, you'd be so proud of him. He tries to paint when he can. He hasn't got the stamina to paint indefinitely, so he can't paint a lot. He keeps as well informed as he possibly can. He does everything he can health-wise that he thinks is helpful. He's his best doctor. Nothing against all of the doctors, including Dr. Bateman, who treat these people, but you really have to be, your own guide. That was so true with my sister. She would have been dead before she hit 20, honestly, if it had been for her own effort to figure out what needed to be done. and to have the fortitude to do it. And he's got that same quality. I think one of the things that has affected him is something that Viktor Frankl and he have in common. I don't know if you know Viktor Frankl, but he discovered in the 40s that what John is doing is possible. And when Viktor Frankl made that discovery, it changed Viktor Frankl's life as well. So he's a great role model for me. I had discovered Viktor Frankl in the 60s when I was taking psychology. And he was a guy who was an amazing psychiatrist, but he was also a Holocaust survivor. And what he did while he was in Auschwitz is observed, because he was an observer. And he saw two different kinds of people. And he saw people who were big, strapping men, tougher than nails. They died in 6 months. He saw little, frail women who looked like they weren't going to last a week. They survived the whole time. And this really puzzled him. And so he kept looking for what are the differences between these people. So he'd interview them in Auschwitz. What are you doing? There was a man who survived. And one of the things that he told Viktor Frankl was that every day he would get up and he would start building a house in his head. It was the house he was going to build when he got out. So he built this house one brick at a time. That kept him alive. There are many other examples. So what he did when he got out and survived, he wrote a book about his experiences, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read it, I recommend it highly. It's a great book. It chronicles his experiences. What he discovered was that if a person doesn't have a sense of meaning in their life, they don't last very long against adversity. The people who have that sense are survivors. They tend to survive. And I think my son is one of those people. He has done so much creative stuff since he's gotten ill that has benefited our lives and enriched our lives. He's taught me a lot about classical music and about many other subjects, because he still is a scholar. CFS is very hard on the brain. He's got cognitive problems. He's still a lot smarter than I am. So our whole family learns a lot from him, and we look up to him as a source of great information and knowledge and wisdom. So Viktor Frankl got a couple of quotes of his that are kind of famous. The one thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. So no matter how horrible this illness can be, you still have some freedom. And the freedom you have is the freedom of your attitude toward that situation, that illness. I remember Kim Snyder, who was at our first conference. She did a documentary on CFS because she had a severe case of CFS. She happened to be a producer. It was called I Remember Me. And if you haven't seen it, it's a great documentary, early documentary about the illness. Another quote of his is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So we always have that option. So, when I get frustrated about the fact that John has this illness and how unfair it is and all that, I've got to change my attitude. Okay, what can I do to help? What is positive that I can bring to the table? And that's what my wife and I have tried to do for the last 17 years. The The last one is a video that I put down there. It's a TED Talk video on Viktor Frankl, a rare recording from 1972, I think, that if you can write that down, or if you get my slides, you'll be able to look at that. It's tremendous. It's about 4 minutes long. I want to talk now about, because I'm a caregiver, I'm supposed to be talking about caregiving, so I'm going to do that. I don't know if there's any caregivers out here, but there's some out there, that's for sure. So caretaking versus caregiving. You ever heard that distinction? I looked it up in the dictionary. Actually, the difference between a caretaker and a caregiver, it's right in the dictionary. Caretaking is something that all the definitions except for one little one at the end have to do with things, like caretaking a building or a piece of land. The only time it refers to a human being is when the person is completely incapacitated. You know, like maybe if you had severe Alzheimer's, you might be a caretaker because the person, or but that's not used usually for human beings, okay? Caregiver is. A caregiver is somebody who gives care to people. So but there's also this whole thing that's grown up around caretaking versus caregiving. And so I'm going to address it just because you're going to run into it. Dr. Deborah Bowers, she says, caring for others is a healthy part of living in the community with those we love and enjoy meaningful relationships with. On the other side of this continuum, however, there is another behavior that can sometimes appear to outsiders, when in reality it's not caring for others, but caretaking for them. Some individuals have personalities that are characterized as nurturing, and their behaviors reflect a basic concern for being supportive of other people. But caretakers engage in activities that rescue and manipulate those around them. Though they're often aware of it, they're unaware of it, I should say. Their motivation is not primarily to meet the needs of others, but to address an unhealthy need inside themselves. Those they caretake become victims caught in the net of learned hopelessness. Enabling, I think, is the word that they use. So you know when you're a caretaker, and you can write down which one of these you fit, but when you're feeling stressed and frustrated all the time. When you're always being accused of crossing boundaries, not just by the person you're caretaking, but by pretty much everybody. When you're expecting something specific in return for fixing a problem. So it's got strings attached. When you're feeling like a martyr for sacrificing your time and energy. You know when you're caretaking, when you're not taking care of yourself because that would be selfish. Or worrying but not acting. Not trusting others to take care of themselves. Starting to solve someone's problem without giving him or her a chance first. Those are all caretaking kind of behaviors. So, let's get to the good stuff. You know when you're caregiving, when you are feeling tired but satisfied or even inspired. When you're creating your own boundaries and honoring those of others. When you're giving freely to someone in need instead of keeping a tab. When you're feeling like your time with someone you care about was well spent. When you're taking care of yourself because you know you can't give when you're empty. When you're taking action instead of brooding. When you're giving others a chance to do what they can to solve their own problems. When you're listening and empathizing without jumping in to fix things. So what does an effective caregiver look like? Caregivers are persons who care for themselves and others. Because they take care of themselves, they can choose to give care to another. Caregivers do not get caught up in results. They don't tend to fix another. They take their own actions, but refrain from taking away the power of choice from others for their own good. I know what's best for you. Caregivers empower others to make choices and take actions, and they celebrate their successes. Caregivers, since they tend to be non-judgmental, are unconditional in their acceptance of others. So where does Ted stand on all this? Okay. So when I was young, through middle age, hopefully it stopped at that point, but I tended toward caretaking. I was very much a take charge, fix it kind of guy. It's been up and down, okay? Sometimes I'm caretaking and sometimes I'm caregiving, so I still fluctuate. Sometimes in the same day. Hopefully I'm making progress, but like I said, it's definitely a continuum. It's not like off and on. Awareness, I think, is the first step toward becoming a caregiver. My family, including my son, has helped me with this. I want to be an effective caregiver. So what can we do? Those who are able, be the best caregiver you can be. Those dealing with the unexpected life, find meaning in this new life. Those who are able, find a way to bring hope to others. Remember, you don't know what you can't do just because you haven't done it yet. So right now we're in a very special time, okay? There's a lot of discovery going on in the field for both ME/CFS and for fibromyalgia. There's a lot of excitement in the research community, research medical community, that we're close to major breakthroughs with these illnesses. We need the resources to preserve and carry forward Dr. Lucinda Bateman's resources, knowledge, and experience right now. This opportunity could be lost if we don't move forward now. Help us create the Shauna Bateman Horn Center of Excellence now. This is not going to be there forever, this opportunity. So time is of the essence. Not the end. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. Yes, sir.
As you were pointing to caretaking, caregiving, I was feeling bad because some of my
So the person, because he hasn't got a mic, I can tell you what he's saying. He's saying that he's feeling bad because he kind of sees himself doing both of these. There's at least one honest person in the room, okay? Maybe two. Anybody who's a caregiver who hasn't caretaken, I'm very skeptical, okay? But it is a process. It's a learning process, a process of awareness, and it's something you can get better at. So, yeah, I think it's a good sign that you're feeling a little bad about it, but that's also a sign of progress.
good sign of feeling bad.
Absolutely. If you were feeling really good, then I'd be nervous. No. Any other questions? If not, then it's 8 o'clock. Well, not even 8 o'clock, but I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.